In this video, I want to look at counterparries, where you've made an attack, that attack has been parried, then a riposte is made, you parry the riposte, and then launch a final attack. And in the first segment that you can see, I am making an attack which my fencing partner Damon parries. He makes a riposte, I parry that riposte and riposte back. In this first segment, I commence a cut, mandrita squalembrato, or cut one in the later British parlance, and Damon starts by looking like he's going to be moving in and parrying, but then he slips back and makes a counter-attack, and I very slightly adjust my cut so that our cuts basically deflect each other. He then cuts with a reverso tondo, or a cut 6 in the later British system. I parry this with the false edge. Now see here where my momentum dies on the parry. I've made sure that I've cut just hard enough to deflect his sword, but to stop mine. I've killed the momentum on my cut. Also note how as I make my parry, my front foot is starting to come forward right at the end, and this is a good example of something I've spoken about in a previous video, the third and fourth governors, the twofold mind, that basically within your defence you should have the seed of an attack, and vice versa. Within your attack you should be starting to think about your defence. I then moulinet and I make a reverso squalembrato, or a cut 2 against Damon, and he attempts to parry with something like an outside hand guard, and it's not very successful, and I push through that and strike him lightly on the head. In the second sequence, Damon makes an attack which is rather short. I slip back a tiny bit and I countercut. He parries that countercut and ripostes, and I parry his riposte and riposte in turn. So what happens first is that, as you can see here, Damon's making an attack. Now I've made a very small movement back, which is all I need to get out of distance, and I'm coming through true guardant, and I'm striking to his head, and he's in good time to deflect that, and he makes a deflective parry out to the right. Not a dreadfully convincing parry, but it certainly prevents me from hitting him. I use the momentum from that, as you can see here, to drop down into Bastard Garden ward, and he launches a rather weak follow-up cut. Wouldn't be a very convincing cut, but you don't want to really don't want to be hit by any cut, which I parry. I come up into True Guardant and I parry, and then I cut around. Now you can see how I'm drawing him to do a high parry, and he's tracking my sword across as it comes around to cut with a mandrita squalembrato or a cut 1, and I come underneath his parry with a mandrita tondo, or a cut 5 in the later English parlance, and cut him across the belly.
Yep.
In this third sequence, we both commence in open fight, and I'll just draw your attention to the foot placement. I am in a very square, sort of Thomas Page style stance, whereas Damon is right leg forward, and increasingly I'm using left leg forward open, right leg forward open and also using Page's square stance. I commence here by stepping my left foot forward, and I'm still not in distance, and then I launch my attack, which is a Mandrill de Squalembrato. Now Damien starts to counter-attack, and you can see here that I see how I tuck my arm in to avoid that counter-attack, and I'm hoping that he'll just whistle by and then I can deflect his blade with the false edge. Now he's a bit smarter than that, because as you can see here, he's not cutting through. He's bringing his sword up, but then he perceives that my arm is a target, and he's coming in to strike my arm, which allows me to go back to my initial plan, which is to come up, deflect him with the false edge, which I do here, and then I continue that motion with that false edge motion, come around with a moulinet, and then I come around and strike him with a reverso tondo to the belly. And once again, as with the previous action, I start my action high, and I've drawn his sword high and then cut underneath it. So in conclusion, all three of these actions have shown essentially the same tactics: that launch an attack, have that attack parried, have my opponent make a riposte, and then parry that riposte and launch my attack in turn, my riposte. And this is a strategy that I use quite often now as I'm getting a bit older and I'm slowing up, and I can't outspeed people the way I could maybe 10 or 15 years ago. And I find it very useful to just basically keep the parry riposte rally going until I can create an opening. And as you can see, particularly in the second and third sequences, the main way that I do that is by drawing a defence and by then flowing around that defence. So I threaten speed, I threaten a fast attack in one line, and then I slow up and move around the defence to attack in what will be the final line.
Your dad's a cruel man. He was like, film this or I'll behead your father.